Welcome to the Lean Blog Podcast. Visit our website at www.leanblog.org. Now, here's your host, Mark Graban.
Hi, this is Mark Graban. Welcome to episode 266 of the podcast for October 25th, 2016. My guest today is Karyn Ross. She is co-author of the new book written with Jeffrey Liker. It's called The Toyota Way to Service Excellence, Lean Transformation in Service Organizations. Now, I have an extra copy of the book to give away. The publisher sent me 2 copies. I'm not sure if that was a defect in their process or if they meant for that, but I'm going to give one away. So if you come to leanblog.org/266, and if you want to tweet about the podcast, click on the link that's there in the post. That will make you eligible to be the recipient of the book. So Karyn first learned about Lean and applied Lean in companies like Paychex. She was working in call center environments, Zurich Insurance, Liberty Mutual, and she's worked with other service sector companies as a consultant. So in this episode, we're going to talk about the book, the important applications of Lean in service settings. You know, Karyn says delighting customers requires something different than what she describes as a mechanistic Lean implementation approach, and I agree. So I hope you enjoy the conversation as much as I did. Again, check out her book, The Toyota Way to Service Excellence. It's available now. Karyn, hi. Thank you so much for being a guest on the podcast today.
Hi, Mark. Thanks so much for inviting me.
So I think we've got a lot to talk about today, about your book and all sorts of topics related to Lean and service organizations. But, you know, maybe start off and introduce yourself to the listeners. It would be good to hear about your background. And I think I always ask people, how did you get introduced to Lean?
Sure. Thanks for asking. My name is Karyn Ross, and I'm a Lean Services Consultant. And I actually started to learn Lean working as a customer service representative at a third-party payroll processing company. And I actually didn't know that I was setting out to learn Lean, but I took care of 300 customers and processed their payroll, and I had to do a lot of manual entry. And as you can imagine, there were a lot of errors that were made on payrolls, and customers weren't very happy because although it may not be a life and death situation as in healthcare, if you get an error on your payroll check, you certainly feel like it's a life and death situation.
Yeah. Well, it's important, yes.
It really is. And of course, the people around me who were doing the work, I was working in a branch office of this payroll processing company. None of them were very happy either. It was a very stressful job. Nobody wants to answer the phone and hear an unhappy customer. That doesn't make a very good day for the people who are doing the work either.
Yeah.
So I thought to myself, there really has to be a better way of doing this. And through a somewhat roundabout way, I actually heard the word Kaizen. Mm-hmm. And I'd never heard it before, and my husband is a professor of Asian studies. So I called him up and I said, do you think that you could go to the library and see if there's any book on this subject, Kaizen? And he came home with Masaaki Imai's book, Kaizen,
right,
which I read. And I said, this is exactly what we need to do to fix the problems that we're having. So I convinced the manager of the branch of the payroll company that I was working in to let me start a committee to improve processes and customer satisfaction using what I'd read in Masaaki Imai's book and some other books that I started reading, and he agreed. And so all of us workers who were on the front line doing customer service representatives, the people who packed the payrolls, the receptionists, we all got together and we started actually solving problems for customers using what I was reading in a variety of books. And I was actually really only one step ahead of everybody every time. But I was reading, we were applying, and in a very short while, we actually improved customer satisfaction, reduced defects, and saved the branch almost $200,000.
Oh, wow.
Uh-huh. And at that point, I had the good fortune to find out that the company actually had a small process improvement department. And when the person who was the head of that department heard about what I was doing, she called me up and said, would you actually like help? in doing this. And
that's better than hearing, "Whoa, yeah, that wasn't authorized by our lean department."
That's correct. And she listened to my story, and honestly, she said, "Would you like me to just come out there and help you and teach you?" And that's how I met the real Leslie Hinkler, who appears as the heroine in the book of the short story that runs through the book, and also appears in chapter 8 in one of the stories that we actually tell in the book. So I will say that after Leslie helped me, I made a lot more progress. And one of the things Leslie suggested, she had a whole reading list set out for me, as well as suggesting that I follow this fabulous blog called Lean Blog. And so I started actually reading your blog as one of the first regular Lean readings that I would be doing. And on August 2nd, 2010, I read How to Design Poor Service, Expect 100% Utilization of People or Resources. And working in a call center, you can imagine this was just like, okay, I understand this absolutely. So I'm going to say thank you very much for being also such a fabulous influence on my thinking over the years.
Thank you. But yeah, I appreciate that. And no, it's great that when you first approached your manager there, that the answer was yes, go ahead and work on improving processes. I mean, in your work, as you've been out there now as a consultant, do you run across organizations where leaders would say no to their employees and their ideas, or feel threatened in one way or another? I'm curious if you run across scenarios where employees don't get that same positive response that you got.
I'm going to say yes and no. The more common experience I have is that I actually run across employees who don't even feel like they have the ability to suggest that they might actually do something like that, right? So they might have an idea and say, okay, we would like to try this, or we'd like to learn this, but unfortunately they're so used to being in a command and control environment and being told what to do that they don't even bring the idea up.
Yeah.
And I think that's the more unfortunate and dangerous position that we're in.
Yeah, I think there's a really sad and sort of common dynamic. I've learned the phrase learned helplessness, where people become demoralized by that environment, where maybe at some point they tried to speak up and they got a bad response, or they're definitely not being asked to speak up, and so people kind of learn just to keep their head down and fight through the day, even if they're unhappy with the circumstances, sort of as you described earlier from your story about being a frontline employee in that organization.
Right. And I'm going to agree with you. It's learned helplessness, and something that I also think of as the I can't habit, right? If you go out onto almost any service room floor and you listen to the conversations that service representatives are having with people, how many times do you actually hear them say, of course we can help you with that. Let's figure out how. More often we hear, I can't.
Yeah.
I can't do this because the computer system doesn't allow me to do it. And I think for a variety of reasons, we've created a culture of I can't. So people don't bring their ideas. They even think they're not creative and that they don't have ideas. And really the whole basis, when you think about it, of Lean or Toyota Way, going all the way back to Sakichi Toyota, is creativity and ingenuity, right? And trying things out and inventing. So how do we create those conditions for people in doing the work instead of the conditions we have now?
Yeah. And I think, as we know, and we're probably, with the listeners of this podcast preaching to the choir, realizing that people do have the ability, but they've been convinced otherwise, unfortunately, over time. I mean, I saw that even, we're talking today, in your work in service organizations, but that was certainly a problem in manufacturing, and that was part of the culture when I was at General Motors, that people had been essentially beaten down over time, and they've been told, that they've been told quite directly sometimes that they didn't, the managers felt strongly they didn't have ideas, and so it's good when we can start turning that around in different organizations.
Yes, absolutely. How many times have you heard don't bring me a problem, bring me your solution, right? And so then when you come forward with the solution and the answer is no, we can't do that, right? People don't want to bring forward their ideas anymore. And I think you put it very well, learned helplessness, right? Or enforced helplessness.
Oh, right. Mandated helplessness.
Helplessness. Maybe that's a new phrase to coin,
Yeah. So I'm curious then to hear a little bit about the evolution of your career then. So you learned about Lean, you were working there in that organization. I'm sure there were a number of steps, to where you are today, working as a consultant, having written the book. What else happened then in your own story?
Right. So after I was working with Leslie for about a year, and I was improving processes in the branch, and it branched out to the whole Midwestern area of the company, I had the good fortune to meet Jeff Weicker. And I met him simply through corresponding and asking him questions about the Toyota way to continuous improvement, which I was probably the first reader of. I think I got it first from Amazon.
Okay.
So he was very kind and generous to teach me many things as well. At a certain point, I really decided that I didn't want to only work processing people's payrolls, so I went off and I started to work at a variety of different companies. So I learned Lean in other human resource areas in insurance. And one of the wonderful things is that I found that there's a lot of generosity of people who have a lot of experience and know much more in the Lean community. So I've been extremely fortunate to have come across Jeff and to have come across Leslie, and they've just made many opportunities for me to apply my learning. And that is how actually just by doing, I've ended up where I am.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, learning by doing, that's, I think, the right way to go about it. And, I hear people in healthcare sometimes, they'll use the phrase, or they'll say, Lean theory, or Lean is a theory. I'm like, well, no, it's a quite practical set of methods and approaches. And even the philosophy is, I think, very practical and pragmatic, and can be applied in very concrete ways. So yeah, learning by doing. No offense to our friends like Jeff, and he's been on the podcast, and Steve Spear and others who come at this from an academic background. I think even those academics who work with Lean are a lot more practical and real world based than we might see in a lot of other fields. And Bob Emiliani, who's a professor out in Connecticut, and I've probably inadvertently insulted other academics like your husband. I apologize for that, but no, there's no need for you to apologize for learning by doing. That's great.
Right, and I'm going to say that all of my learning by doing also was based on taking theory that I read in books, right? Because still, if you could see here, I have a huge Lean library, right? And a library of a variety of other things. And I simply read those things, and then I applied them to what I was doing at the time, right? And learned from doing it. And it worked better once I had people to coach and guide me, right?
Yeah.
That
right.
really
Yeah.
helped. But the whole thing came from turning theory into practice. And again, hearkening back to, the roots of the Toyota production system, Sakichi Toyota learned how to do things by doing them, right? He had a theory of what to do, and then he applied it. And I think that a lot of times people are afraid to start doing anything in Lean because they think, I don't know enough, right? All you need to do is really start.
Yes.
Try it out and start, right?
Well, I think, and I see this in healthcare a lot, where I think there's sort of the expert trap, where people don't want to do something unless they are going to do it perfectly. I'm like, well, that sets the bar too high. I mean, learning by doing with a coach is probably less frustrating and more productive. But I understand that dynamic, where a lot of times I'm convincing people, do some small tests of change, do a pilot somewhere, try some things, see what works. It's not an excuse to not plan, but at some point you got to do. And then study, then adjust, right?
Yep, absolutely. And I'm going to say that there's really a theme that runs through the book is learning by doing with a coach to help and guide you, because lots of times, and this is my own, really harkens back to my own personal experience. There's a difference between practice and correct practice, right? Practice makes permanent. Yeah. We like to say, so it can make permanent a good habit, or it can make permanent not so good habit. So if you have a coach and someone who has experienced before, and that's my favorite translation of the word sensei, one who's gone before, right?
Yes. Yep. Yep.
Then that person can help guide you to practice correctly. So build in quality at the source, then you're not having to unlearn, right?
Yeah.
And learn again and have that rework. So that's actually a theme that goes through Toyota Way to Service Excellence, is learn with a coach to help you.
And what are your thoughts on trying to strike the balance? We talk about learn by doing, and we realize we learn by making mistakes. So where's that balance between, if you were a sensei to somebody, or if you were being coached by somebody, what types of mistakes should you let people make? We can't try to avoid all mistakes, but there's some mistakes that might really kill a lean transformation process, right? Where's that balance?
Right. So I'm going to say Leslie, who is a fabulous, fabulous teacher and sensei, really taught me in a very traditional way, right? So she gave me a challenge and then let me struggle and muddle through. And when I was really frustrated, I could pull the andon cord and
ask for help.
She was in New York State. I was in Illinois. But the thing is, I always knew that no matter what, she was not going to let me fail in any kind of way that was going to be detrimental to me or to the business, right? She was going to be responsible for the work that I was doing. So her watchful eye actually gave me the courage to try. And she was always one step ahead in her thinking and her understanding of where I should be. And I think that's very important when we talk about coaching, what the role of that person is. So there were many times in ways that were not going to be detrimental to anything other than perhaps my own ego and learning, right? That absolutely, she let me go down the wrong track far enough so that I learned to self-correct, right? But not so that anything was going to be detrimental. A lot of the processes we worked on had federal regulation, right, or state regulation.
Yeah.
We couldn't be out of compliance for anything like that. Leslie's goal was not to teach me a set of tools. Her goal was to teach me how to think. So the only answer ever was, it depends, right?
Yeah, I'm guilty of that. People get annoyed by that sometimes, but...
Right. But what it did was, first of all, it did teach me how to think, right? And it allowed me to have the confidence to know that in whatever situation it is, I could go and I could see and I could think and I could consider, right? And I think this is the opposite of what we were talking about, learned or mandated helplessness, right?
Yeah.
It's how do you teach someone to be an independent, critical thinker, right? And confident in that ability.
Well, and I think that's tough for people, and I think a good coach helps build confidence, because I think with that learned helplessness, that makes people, they get into a trap where they say, well, just tell me the answer. And so, well, no, I want you to figure it out, and that's scary. And I think that's where, even going back to Amai, as you mentioned earlier in his book Kaizen, there's this idea of baby steps, and people build confidence by not giving them too big of a challenge, something that's challenging but not disheartening.
Correct. And I think that also, we are in coaching, and in thinking of that really traditional model, we have the idea of challenge, but I think sometimes we miss out on what I call nurture, right? Because I always knew that Leslie, if I needed her, was there. One day I had worked myself up into a frenzy of something that turned out to be nothing, but I called her. And I never called, right?
Yeah.
I like to struggle. I never called. if she ever saw my number on her phone, she actually would answer. So when she answered, she said to me, "Be quick, you have 2 minutes. I'm in a meeting with senior vice presidents, but when I saw your number, I knew you needed me." So I knew that I wasn't going to be anywhere, right? That I was going to be in a situation where I was really going to fail. I could really call for a lifeline. And I think we miss that in coaching too. We push people out into the unknown zone, into their uncomfortable zone, into the learning zone. But we have to, as coaches, stay there with them, right?
Yeah.
And we really only can learn through doing, right? I can read a book of theory. I could read all of those books, but until I actually applied them and tried them out and found out what happened, I couldn't be confident. So the only way, in fact, I believe that a person can gain confidence is through doing. And your coach, your sensei, your teacher, you have to borrow your courage and confidence from them while you're learning, right?
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I think, back to the point of learning from experience, and you don't want to just repeat the wrong things over and over again. Dr. Deming had an old expression, something about, not all experience is helpful. Sometimes people have 25 years of experience doing the wrong things or leading the wrong way, and sometimes that's not their fault, but it does get in the way of embracing new approaches.
Right. Practice makes permanent, correct?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. But I'm curious to kind of delve into got to the topic around some of the mistakes that people might make without a coach or without somebody guiding them or helping them. This is something I've blogged about, and sometimes I get I rant and rave. But things that are done in the name of lean that discourage and demoralize people instead of being helpful. I'm curious if there are some things that you see happening out there that you sort of would try to coach people away from.
Sure, absolutely. And the first big one is that lean is some kind of set of tools that there is a recipe to apply. And when you apply those tools, you're going to get a lean transformation.
Yeah.
So, do 5S first, then you have to do a value stream map, right?
Yeah.
All of those things that are very prescriptive in nature.
Right.
I think that a problem is that people have lost the idea that lean transformation isn't an end in itself.
Right.
Right? That serving customers and developing people through challenge and nurture so that they can continuously improve for customers, so that their customers are satisfied and delighted, and the business that they work for fulfills its long-term purpose, that's the goal.
Yeah,
right?
That's well said. Yeah.
Yes, and I think it's so easy to fall into the trap and say, okay, we're going to be lean. What's the purpose? Why do you want to be lean for? And then you get all these tools, and then you get all kinds of mechanistic thinking. And when we have mechanistic thinking, we love to talk about organizations in mechanistic terms. We function like a well-oiled machine, right?
Right. Yeah, that's the old habit before lean, right?
Yeah. We're going to install a lean management system.
Right.
You cannot install a lean management system
right.
like you're changing an engine on a car,
yeah.
right? Or you're putting a new hard drive in your computer, because our organizations are made up of human beings.
Yes.
Right? And our customers are human beings. And unfortunately, when you start to think of your organization in mechanistic terms as a machine, we tend to think of our customers in the same way. And when we talk about service actually means serving other people, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, so I see those really as the common problem. And again, short-term, mechanistic, tool-based thinking to focus on results. Let's lean out processes. And instead of how do we best serve the human beings that are our customers, so it makes their life better, it makes the world better, and we fulfill our purpose as an organization.
Yeah. Well, and you mentioned short-term thinking. That's another old habit. Dr. Deming, sort of railed against short-term thinking. Principle number one in Jeff Liker's book, The Toyota Way, of course, is making decisions based on the long-term perspective, even at the expense of the short term. And I tell you, for all of the times people reach out and ask a question along the lines of, what lean tools should we use first? And I try to redirect it like you were doing there around, well, what are you trying to accomplish? And there's no formula. But I've never once had somebody reach out and say, how does our organization get better at long-term thinking and making decisions based on the long term? I mean, have you seen in some of the organizations you study and write about in the book examples of people that have made progress toward long-term thinking, or are they just more naturally a long-term thinker?
I'm going to say that a great example of that, of someone who I would say is a long-term thinker, is Richard Sheridan at Menlo Innovations, right? And if you read his book, Joy Inc., close to the end of the book, he has a visioning exercise, right? And he says everybody should do this visioning exercise, and then he, publishes, what he wrote as his visioning. And I think it's really important. We're so busy and caught up in the here and now. I mean, how many times are you thinking, right, okay, you're 20 years old, you're not thinking, oh, at 65, I'm going to retire, better start saving.
Yeah.
Right? I would say that's it. Richard Sheridan, Menlo Innovations in here. I would say that a lot of corporations, especially those that answer to who they believe their real customers are, their shareholders, right? Rather than the customers that pay for their services and that they truly serve, tends to be very short-term thinking. And I've been in many meetings in many organizations where I've heard, well, this decision was made based on what our shareholders need, right?
Yeah.
In the Toyota Way to Service Excellence, actually our first principle, and what the book is grounded on as well, is the philosophy of long-term systems thinking. Passionately pursue purpose based on your organization's guiding values.
Yeah.
So we're in the same place where we started suggesting to people the same thing, right?
Yeah. Well, and Rich Sheridan, for those who haven't heard the episode, he was a guest in episode 189 of the podcast about over 2.5 years ago. So people can go to leanblog.org/189. But yeah, I've had a chance to visit Menlo Innovations. Another company in Ann Arbor, Zingerman's, is in the book. I've seen Ari. I'm going to butcher his last name. Ari, one of the co-founders of Zingerman's, Zwijnswijk.
Yes, and I'm not sure I will do any better.
Ari from Zingerman's. I saw him speak at a quality conference, even though he's not a quote-unquote quality guy, but that's what made him such a great speaker, because he was talking about some of those same themes. I think it's interesting, Menlo and Zingerman's are private companies. They don't have the same short-term Wall Street pressures that a large public corporation might face. That might be a part of it, but I think a lot of it is really just the mindset and the leadership. Those organizations, Zingerman's, I think, has a really strong dynamic, it seems, of service toward customers and service toward their employees. Really, really fundamental ideas, right?
Right. Absolutely. And I think that there's, when we think about long-term thinking also, there's two things to think about. If you go to most companies and you go, I'm going to say even most levels of management, because I've done this in a number of places, and I say, could you please tell me what your mission statement is or your purpose statement? They say, well, I could go to the intranet and look it up.
It's printed on the back of my badge, perhaps.
Right. But is it really a very deep purpose if none of your employees actually know what that is and can say that, right? And again, when we talk about long-term thinking, it's how we get there, right? I have a saying, how we get there is as important as where we're going, right? And also in the Toyota Way, Jeff said, the right process produces the right result. Right? Comes from Dr. Deming too, right?
Yeah, right.
And the thing is, we're not willing, I think, to focus on the means. In the
Right.
West, we're very focused on the ends,
Yeah.
right? But the right process is going to produce the right results. And Toyota Way and the 17 principles and the 4 Ps, that's really your means, right?
Yeah.
You have to trust that if you follow the right means and you have a strong purpose, the end is going to be right.
Yeah. And I'm putting it on the spot a bit because I didn't throw this out as a topic or a question to prep for, but everything you bring up there makes me think of what's happened recently at Wells Fargo. If you followed that story, their recent scandal.
Right, and I'm going to tell you, actually, I have not.
Well, in a nutshell, I mean, it's a story of, you've got a large bank that, to your point around purpose, it seemed like the purpose became making money. And the purpose was translated, there was a goal set that tellers and people working in the bank were under extreme pressure to hit a goal of every customer having 8 different accounts or financial instruments. And people were not measuring or managing the process. In fact, I saw a quote from the CEO who's now been cast aside, who said basically, I don't care about process. I'm like, well, then that was a recipe for people fudging the numbers, distorting the system, creating fake accounts, unauthorized accounts. If you dig into that scandal, I think you would look and say, well, gosh, this was really quite predictable because they weren't doing the things that you've been talking about or that a lean organization would be talking about.
Right, and that goes right back to Dr. Deming as well, right? Don't manage based on targets because people will reach the target, but they're going to destroy the organization while they're doing it, right?
And I think that's what happened at Wells Fargo, and the CEO and others, they fired 5,000 employees who were all really unethical in their view. I'm like, no, the employees were doing what you were telling them to do. We're going to have this goal of 8. The CEO was saying 8 is great. I'm like, well, there's a rational basis for setting a goal that people thought was unrealistic and unreasonable. And I mean, I'm curious, call centers, when you work in call centers, what would happen if you set an unreasonable target for the average call length and you were to beat people up over that and fire them for not hitting that target? What would happen? Right.
And honestly, those things do happen. A really interesting story that we actually tell in the book is from Zingerman's. So Zingerman's has a call center, right?
Yeah.
And unlike most call centers whose metrics are to reduce the amount of time that call center reps spend on the phone with each customer, right? So we can have more volume, more productivity. Zingerman's goal is to increase the time. And the reason that they want to increase the time is that they actually want to deeply understand their customer needs. So they understand that when you have your customer on the phone, you are actually not only creating the value. If you're a service organization, you're creating value with your customer while you are on the phone with them, right?
Yeah.
It's occurring right then. But you also have an unbelievable opportunity to find out more. So I was visiting Zingerman's, and one of the fabulous people in their call center was telling me the story. Oftentimes, they get incorrect phone calls from people who are calling one of Zingerman's many other businesses under their umbrella, right?
Right.
And so they call the call center, and of course, think of your experience with many other call centers. Many other call center reps would just simply say to you, okay, you didn't call this business, right? Hang up and call again. If you're lucky, you might get transferred correctly the first time, right? Yeah,
that happened to me earlier when I had to call a business. I ended up with somebody in the wrong state, and they said, I don't know how you got to me, but, they transferred me at least.
Right. But at Zingerman's, what happens is they simply answer the person's question. So they know, even though they're the mail order, every morning they talk with the deli, right? So they know what kind of pastries they have. So when the customer actually called up and said, I need to pick up some pastry from the deli on my way to work, the call center rep at Zingerman's mail order, which is not the part of the business that does that, asked a whole variety of questions. Is this for you personally to eat? Are you driving? Are you going to eat it while you're driving? Or are you going to eat it at the office? Because, of course, if it's some sticky, gooey thing, right? Maybe someone doesn't want to eat it while they're driving.
Right.
Oh, do you need 12 of them, right? Because you're bringing it to the office. And so based on the customer's response and all of the questions that was asked, they're able to actually say, oh, well, we could recommend that you get this pastry or this pastry, right? And then they could actually reach out to the deli and say, oh, someone's going to be coming by with this or that. That's what service excellence is about, right? That's what focusing on what your customer needs, not on internally what we need. Well, we need to reduce costs this quarter, so we need each customer service rep to be able to handle this many more calls, right? Yeah. So we're going to find waste in the process and remove all the waste in the process. So we can now give you, expect, your call to be shorter. Oh, and we're going to have 100% utilization, right? Well, because goodness knows we don't want a call center rep to sit idle.
So I imagine Zingerman's doesn't care as much about the utilization percentage then.
Zingerman's is working to serve customers, right? And I would actually really encourage people to read the story in the Toyota Way to Service Excellence about this. There's fabulous illustration photographs of the visual management that they use in their call center, and they have also a process called the hot seat. So they know when their peak calls times are going to be, and they have a person who's just dedicated to answering the phone. If they reach the threshold of phone calls, they add another hot seat. If they reach that threshold, they add another. And then, of course, people get a break. After 2 hours of being in the hot seat, you rotate off and you get to do something else. So it's very, it's totally not as stressful for the people who are doing the work as well. And honestly, when you think about service excellence, if you have people who are stressed and unhappy answering the phone, how happy are they going to be able to make your customers?
Right. Well, and it seems like, what I hear you saying is that Zingerman's treats that time on the phone with the customer as a gift or as an opportunity, as opposed to it being viewed as an obligation and an annoyance and a cost, right?
Correct. And I love the way you put that. It's a gift, right? Because we're, as a service organization, here to serve customers. It's our joy and privilege to serve customers, right? I unfortunately have supported many organizations, and I think this is very easy to happen in service organizations where you don't actually see your customer in person very often. That it's very easy to stop thinking about people as human beings, right? And so you spend 8 hours a day with your colleagues, and there's a lot of internal stuff that has to get done. Whether it really does or whether it really doesn't is another matter, right? Yeah. But you become very internally focused. Yep. And all of those things become very much more important because you see them, because you see your manager who says, well, where's the report of this or that, right? Yep. I need that, and we're going to mark you for that on your performance review this year, how timely you were in handling all those extra things, right? That actually then what happens, instead of remembering that your customer calling you is a gift, you're like, well, how can they be interrupting my work? Service means, that's it. Service means focusing on other people, right? That is what service is. It is about that external focus on the customer. And that's actually our second point in the book, is deeply understand your customer. Yeah. Right?
Well, and it seems like that idea of service extends to leadership. When you see the strong elements of servant leadership in the Toyota approach and great lean organizations in different industries. Managers and leaders, I think, either forget or they were never taught that their purpose is to serve their employees, when people usually view that the other way. The employees are here to serve me, the leader.
Absolutely, and I think an example of that. Oftentimes, if you go to Toyota, you'll see the org chart is upside down, right?
Right.
with the leader on the bottom and the people who are doing the work at the top because they're closest to the customer. Oftentimes, I've been in many organizations that I go, that have installed lean management systems, and now everybody huddles. And sometimes people don't like this very much, and they say, well, it's actually taking me away from my work, to satisfy customers.
Right.
And I say, I have a different perspective. I say, you have been given a gift from your company because you have now been given 15 minutes of your day to focus on the customer, right? What do your customers need from you today? How can you better serve them today and make sure that all the work that needs to be done for them needs to be done?
Yeah.
I said, this is your gift. You need to think about it as your gift because there are many organizations that do not allow their employees this kind of gift, right?
Right. Or I think it's the same idea of a manager. Oh, I don't have time to coach people in Kaizen. Yeah, I think there's a direct parallel. You should view that as a gift. We're executives are encouraging you, giving you time to spend figuring out what your employees need. Back to the point you made earlier, if you help take care of the employees, they can take care of the customers. We see that in healthcare and so many other settings, how important that principle is.
Yes, and it goes right back to the beginning of our conversation, about learned or mandated helplessness. The simple fact is, in a service organization, you need people to be able to solve problems and think critically on their feet, because when they are in contact with the customer, they're making value with them, right? Yeah. So if you as a manager aren't actually dedicating a good part of your time to helping your people become better critical thinkers and problem solvers, the simple fact is they're not going to be able to serve your customers any better. And all you're going to ever hear when you walk around the service floor is, I can't.
Yeah.
And then your customers are going to go somewhere else because guess what? No customer ever wants to hear the words, I can't.
Well, and it goes back even to Henry Ford, and Henry Ford Health System is highlighted in the book. Another great Michigan company. I'm being proud about my home state there. But Henry Ford said something to the effect of, if you believe you can or cannot do something, you're probably right. And yeah, I mean, believing you can do something is probably not wholly sufficient. I mean, I can't sit here and say, I believe I can fly. I'm not going to go jump off the roof of my house. That's not enough. But when it comes to workplace improvement, I think there's that either self-fulfilling positive prophecy of my employees have ideas and they'll work with me to make things better for customers in the organization, or there's the self-defeating prophecy of we don't have time, my employees don't care, it won't make a difference. That it's sad when people have that I can't mindset.
I agree, and actually that's my favorite Henry Ford quote: whether you think you can or whether you think you can, you're right.
Yeah.
And I'm going to say that many things, and we talk about this in the book as well, and it really falls into some of my brother's kata area, right, is to set a vision for where you're going and a challenge. So right now, we may not know how to process all payroll checks with no defects, right? That's in the future.
Yeah.
We don't know how to get there. Right now, we have to say, I can't. However, what we can do is progressively, iteratively, through doing and removing obstacles, learn how to get there. And that develops our people, right? And it develops their critical thinking skills. And sooner or later, we find we've reached our goal, right?
Yeah.
That's exactly it. 5 years ago, 6 years ago now, I hadn't heard the word lean Kaizen, right?
Yeah.
One might think that 5 years later, it might be surprising that I might write a book on that subject, right?
Yeah.
And practice that. Because the thing is to figure out how, right? And that's what customers want to hear. They want us to figure out how. And honestly, if we don't figure out how, whether we're service organizations or manufacturing organizations, someone else is going to figure out how.
Yeah.
right? And then guess where our customers are going?
Right.
They're going right over to there. So it really behooves us, if we would like to fulfill our long-term purpose, and even if we would actually like to make money for the next quarter, is to make sure that all of us have the skills and tools and support, right, to use the 17 principles really of the Toyota Way to Service Excellence, because all of those lean tools and principles and practices, that's your how. That's the means to go from I can't do this now to I can, right? Flow is the ideal. How do we get there?
Right. Flow is the ideal. Zero defects is the ideal. Let's keep working at that. So, well, you mentioned the book, and to wrap things up, I did want to come back to talking more directly about the book and the story behind the book. You mentioned your library, and it's the same in my office, my library. There are lots of books already written about lean, and I'm not saying you shouldn't have written it, but there are lots of books out there. The question is more about, well, how did the book come to be, right?
Sure. A couple of things. First of all, I think Jeff and I, at a certain point, were both overwhelmed by a lot of mechanistic lean, that we heard about, and especially because I've never worked in manufacturing. As I said, I've only worked in services, right? And I think 1 week, both Jeff and I got about 6 questions from people saying, can you recommend a really good book about lean in services? And neither of us could. So then we thought, why don't we write one? Why don't we write one from the perspective of lean as Toyota Way, right? Holistic, systematic, not tool-based. How to teach people the principles, right? And the philosophy, and how to teach them to work with their organization to think about what that long-term purpose is and what serving customers is really all about, right? Yeah. And then they can apply to services. I will say, as I said, I've never worked in manufacturing. There was never a time in which I read Toyota Way or any other book that I thought this doesn't apply in services. Lean is more important in service than manufacturing because we can't see many of the things that are happening in services. All of the visual management, it helps us see. And as
make things visual, yes.
Make things visual of things you couldn't see. And because lean is really, service is about people, right? And so if we focus on the customer, we're actually focused on people. Right. So lean much more important in services than it is in manufacturing.
Yeah, I agree with you, and it's great to that you've written a book that is oriented for people in service industries. They still may, my concern, they're still going to cringe at the Toyota thing, because in healthcare I hear time and time again, somebody thinks they're being really smart by pointing out, well, patients are not cars. I'm like, yes, agreed. Like I must look dumb sometimes. And people point out, of course, patients are not cars. But go ahead. Sorry.
I took a group of folks from the insurance industry to visit Toyota, right? And again, we always get, we're not making widgets, we don't have short cycle times, things aren't repetitive. And I don't think many people who necessarily work in, this kind of service industry have ever gone to see manufacturing.
Right. They usually have not.
And when they went, you know what they said? They said, this is unbelievably complicated.
Yeah.
A car has millions of parts. It's much easier to do what we do, right?
Yeah.
And I think when you take people to show them, right, then you can actually dispel some of that as well.
Yes.
But we do make things in services, right?
Well, and we're serving people, but I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, because think about it. If you go to a fast food restaurant, you're going to a service organization, but you get a product too. So now they have to be careful about the experience you get, and they have to be careful about the product you get, right?
Yep.
When you fly, all you get is your experience. Mm-hmm. You're not taking home a seat of the plane, hopefully, right? Now you might get a cookie when you fly. Maybe not. But in that situation, the experience better be really fabulous, because that's what you're getting. Yeah. And it's not nothing. It's something. You've made something, right?
Yeah. And in healthcare, you're getting health. You're getting quality of life. And when people play patients aren't cars card, I come back to, and I try to be as constructive as I can and not be snippy or snarky, but patients are far more important than cars. And this is a matter of life and death, and we need to prevent errors, and we need to create better workplaces so nurses and doctors don't quit the profession in droves. This is more important, and it's all the more reason, kind of like you were saying, this is more important in healthcare as a type of service sector than it is in manufacturing. I totally agree with you.
Absolutely. I wrote a little piece on LinkedIn. I don't know if you saw it. A few weeks ago, my husband went for a fairly routine medical procedure, and I went with him, and it was at a facility I hadn't been to. And I was very shocked because they gave me one of those pagers like you would get at restaurant. And when his procedure was done, my pager buzzed. And then I could go pick him up like a sandwich. And I was really shocked. And of course, the waiting room, it was a very efficient process getting us into the waiting room, and they took him back for the procedure very quickly. Right. And then I was sitting there with all these people in their pagers waiting, and every time someone's pager buzzed in that loud, annoying way, all of us who, were stressed and waiting for our loved one basically leapt out of our seats. Right. And I was just like, healthcare, it has the word care in it. Right. Care. Where was the caring?
And
right?
Yeah, and I see the article. I'll link to it on the blog post for this episode. But yeah, it's called Leaning Out Processes or Creating Service Excellence. And people, when the other card they'll play that is right next to patients are not cars, they'll say, well, we can't turn the hospital into a factory. And I say, well, absolutely not. We want to make the hospital the best, most caring healthcare organization it can be. That comes back to what you were saying in terms of sense of purpose and sense of service, right?
That's exactly it. And think about the unpleasant consequences for the people who really need care and their families, because it's unbelievably stressful for your family if your loved one is in a hospital, right? If we forget that our goal is to serve and care for customers, right? Rather than lean out processes for internal efficiency.
Yep. And so, boy, more people got that message, and this book is going to help them. That would be a really good thing. So as we wrap up here, where can people learn more about the book, about your work, websites? Where do you recommend people come and find you, other than finding you and following you on LinkedIn?
Sure. People can find me at www.karynrossconsulting.com, and my name has a Y in it, so Karyn consulting.com. You can also take a look for the book on our new website that we're just getting started, TWTSE, so Toyota Way to Service Excellence.com. And if you subscribe to that website as well, you will get a free preview of the first 2 chapters of the book. Well, so great. Anybody who has any questions, please do feel free to reach out. I've been very lucky because many people have helped me to learn and get to where I am, and I'm always happy to help others.
Well, great. And writing a book is a fantastic way of doing that. So again, the title of the book is The Toyota Way to Service Excellence, Lean Transformation in Service Organizations. Jeff Liker and Karyn Ross. Karyn, it was such a pleasure to be able to meet you and to be able to chat with you today, and for having you on the podcast. Maybe we can do this again in the future.
I would absolutely love it. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Thanks for listening. This has been the Lean Blog Podcast. For Lean news and commentary updated daily, visit www.leanblog.org. If you have any questions or comments about this podcast, email Mark at leanpodcast@gmail.com.